produced with exclusive support from Boehringer Ingelheim.
The biggest killer in the Western world is thrombosis. Thrombosis happens when a clot forms inside an artery or a vein, obstructing the flow of blood. When the clot blocks one of the main arteries in the heart, it causes a heart attack. If a clot forms in a deep vein in the leg, which can happen when a patient is stuck in bed, it's called deep vein thrombosis. Typically, the leg swells up, and the danger is that the clot will dislodge and travel to the lungs, causing a pulmonary embolism. Sometimes a clot gets lodged in the brain, starving the tissue of oxygen and causing a stroke. For half a century, doctors have been using a drug called Warfarin to try to prevent thrombosis. Warfarin is an anticoagulant. It's popularly known as a blood thinner, but in fact it doesn't affect the thickness or viscosity of blood. Instead, it decreases the quantity of proteins that normally allow blood to clot. But warfarin is a problematic drug, and for 50 years, scientists have been on a quest to replace it. The story actually begins more than 50 years ago, in the cattle ranches of North America. In the 1920s, farmers noticed their cows were bleeding to death after minor medical procedures, and sometimes spontaneously. This was Depression era, and to save money, farmers were feeding their cattle spoiled hay made from sweet clover. It turned out that something in the sweet clover was stopping the cow's blood from clotting properly. In 1941, scientists identified the culprit, an anticoagulant called dicumarol. Warfarin is a more potent form of dicumarol, and initially it was used to poison rats. But when a US Army recruit tried and failed to commit suicide with warfarin, doctors realised they could turn this poison into a life-saving drug. One early recipient was US President Eisenhower, who was given the drug after suffering a heart attack. In the Western world today, warfarin is a commonly prescribed drug, and you probably know somebody who takes it. As we age, and especially if our diet is full of cholesterol, fatty deposits build up in our veins and arteries. These deposits, known as atherosclerotic plaques, narrow the vessels and make blood flow sluggish. Sometimes a plaque ruptures, exposing material that activates platelets in the blood and triggers a clot. The platelets clump together and are held in place by a protein called fibrin. Fibrin is the end product of the coagulation cascade. Warfarin reduces fibrin production by disrupting reactions further up the cascade. It does this by inhibiting an enzyme called vitamin K epoxide reductase. But warfarin has many drawbacks. It's slow to take action, it interacts with other drugs, and people vary in their response, meaning patients must be monitored regularly to get the dose right. Because of these complications, say doctors, some people at risk from thrombosis are not treated. In the late 1980s, a growing awareness that thrombosis was a major cause of heart attacks and strokes fueled the search for a better anticoagulant drug. Blood clotting is a natural and often useful process. It stops us bleeding too much when we injure ourselves. So any new drug needs to prevent dangerous clotting but without causing excess bleeding. Bleeding is one of the main side effects of warfarin. So what exactly were scientists looking for? The coagulation cascade is a series of protein activation reactions involving enzymes called proteases. Designing inhibitors that target proteases is tricky. Another key challenge is to design a drug that can be taken orally, as warfarin can, so that patients can treat themselves at home. Eventually, scientists identified two promising drug targets, factor Xa and thrombin. Factor Xa plays a central role in the coagulation cascade by catalysing the production of thrombin, and thrombin converts fibrinogen to fibrin, the stuff which acts like the glue in the clot. Studies showed that both factor Xa and thrombin could be suppressed without causing bleeding complications. What's more, solving the crystal structure of thrombin helped scientists find drugs to target this key enzyme. In the last decade, clinical trials have put factor Xa inhibitors and thrombin inhibitors to the test. After 50 years of searching, there are 3 new oral anticoagulants on the market, which could eventually replace warfarin. There's dabigatran, which inhibits thrombin, and then rivaroxaban and apixaban, which inhibit factor Xa. Other drugs are still in clinical trials. For doctors and patients, this is a real milestone. Having a better treatment for thrombosis will benefit many of us.
Produced with exclusive support from Boehringer Ingelheim.